Show!
Welcome to Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp. Happy New Day, everybody. I'm sitting here with my lovely mother, and before we start this episode, I just want to thank the two brand new Golden Buddhas. Well, three, actually. Ruben and Letty in Sacramento became Golden Buddhas this past week, and my man Ziggy Stardust in Portland, Oregon. I met Ruben and Letty at the Sacramento Punchline. They're in Sacramento. The last time I was in Sacramento, I think I told you this story, Mom. I did a year before, I had done a benefit for the police. Well, you were with me right after that because the guy that was at that show asked me to do the police benefit in Modesto.
Yeah, that was great.
And then so I think that was like 6 months later, and then that allowed us to do another trip to Yosemite. I've taken you to Yosemite 3 times.
Great trips.
Great trips. I mean, we could talk about that for a minute. I always loved first time we went to Yosemite, I was living in San Francisco in the early 90s, and we went to Yosemite, and we stopped off in Modesto, California, and we bought strawberries on the side of the road, and they were, I always love it because you always say an accurate description, they were as big as your fist.
And they were the best strawberries I've ever eaten.
Yeah, and they were unbelievably delicious. And whenever I've ever met anyone from Modesto, they always go, "Oh, it's a shithole." And I go, "Oh, no. My mother and I have got the greatest memory of these strawberries that were as big as your fist."
Yeah, it was great.
And we ate them on our drive to Yosemite.
We picked it up like it was a farm, and where they had a little booth where they had strawberries, fresh ones, and also they had done jams. It was really terrific.
That's one of my favorite things about California in the summer. You know, that there's just fruit stands everywhere in like San Joaquin Valley and Modesto and all these different places. The last time we went to Yosemite, you know, we drove through Modesto and we had our eyes peeled for strawberries and I guess they weren't in season the last time we drove through there. But then right as we got to Yosemite National Park, right before you got to the entrance, whatever little village is in that area, there was a guy selling cherries.
Oh, and they were really
on the side, and they were these really Siamese cherries. So there was like every cherry was like 2 grown together.
It was wonderful.
And they were delicious.
They were delicious.
So I think that's definitely, my favorite national park in America. And we've got these great memories there. And, oh my God, you remember the bears the first time we went to Yosemite?
Oh my gosh, well, that was a funny story because, well, you tell it, Tommy.
Well, yeah, so Yosemite Valley, which is so heavenly, and especially in the springtime when there's a lot of snowfall in the Sierra Nevada mountains around it, if there's a lot of snowfall in the winter, they get these magnificent waterfalls in the spring. And the first time we went, it was spring, and there's like 5 waterfalls all around Yosemite. Remember we walked close to that one waterfall and like there was so much mist. That was it, the Bridal Veil.
Yes.
Oh my God, you remember it?
Yeah, I did.
And you're getting wet as you get closer to it.
But it was great.
So much water and mist that's splashing up in the air. It's incredible. But so in that Yosemite Valley, there's a little tiny church. And we had gone and looked at the church, and then we were walking around, and I think you said, "Oh, there's a deer," or we thought we saw.
Well, we kept seeing deer. We saw the water was so clear that we could see the fish underneath a little bridge that we stopped at, and we could see deer that came right up to people. It seemed they weren't afraid. So you said, "Oh, there's a deer behind that
big rock."
Big rock. And you said, "Oh, let's run over there and meet it on the other side." So we're running over there, and all of a sudden I see this bear. Oh my God, it's a bear, not a deer.
Yeah.
And I'm going, "Oh my God, oh Tommy," and I turn around, and this thing, the bear was not paying any attention to us, but it was like rooting around this fallen tree limb, a big tree that had fallen, and but it's out there. It's a wild animal, and it's big. So it was like, oh my God. And so I turned around. You said I turned around in the air.
Well, my memory, you said, it's a bear, and then we both started running away from it.
Oh, yeah.
And my memory is that you outran me, and you even hurdled a log, like a tree that had fallen over. You turned into like an Olympic sprinter. That was like such a funny memory. I mean, I'm glad we weren't mauled to death by the bear, but it was such a funny memory to see your mother outrunning you. I mean, it was...
That is bad, Tommy.
It wasn't bad. We, almost shit in our pants when we saw that it was a bear.
Well, I was glad that it wasn't paying any attention to us. But
and then when we've gone back to Yosemite twice after that, and we've saw some wildlife, but it was never like that first trip. And I think that's because more people go now, and they've...
and the water was not clear like it was before. I don't know what happened. Well, there's more and more people, and it's not the same. I guess the animals just push back. And I wonder what the difference was between, 100 years ago and when we first even went, because there was a big difference between the first and last time we've gone.
Yeah. But such a special trip, and so the police benefit. So we got to go back to Modesto, and there was a guy that was a cop in Modesto who maybe he was even the sheriff or someone in charge, because he hired me to do this police benefit in Modesto. But a year before, I had done this police benefit in Sacramento, and it turned out these were all the helicopter police of Sacramento and the canine police of Sacramento. So I was on stage, and I said, it's an honor to play for you guys, and my father flew helicopters in Vietnam, and
yes, he did.
Blah-de-de-blah, and so I just, kept going on. So I made friends with these guys, and they said the next time I come to Sacramento, I could go for a ride in their police helicopter. They have one helicopter that's a Huey, like that was flown in Vietnam.
Yeah.
But the guy was trying to get me a ride on the Huey, but they don't use that one that often. So just had to go up in the regular police helicopter. And the thing that I learned spending a day flying above Sacramento is that a lot of people have shit in their yards they need to clean up. Everybody had an old fridge, an old washing machine, cars, whatever. But there was the most remarkable thing we saw that day. There was a story came on the radio, and I go, we got to go. We left the area that we were flying around looking at things, and then we went to the Highway 99. There was an illegal immigrant Mexican guy that was going to commit suicide, and he was on the top of an overpass. Oh. So the police had stopped the traffic. So traffic is just totally blocked up, and it was the most amazing thing that I witnessed. These police in Sacramento were so incredible. They stopped two big motor coach tour buses and positioned them underneath the guy under the overpass.
Wow.
And then this other cop, like these cops are trying to talk to him. We watch this whole scene unfold. And then this one cop goes out there and gets the guy, and he pulled him off the fence and down onto one of the roofs of the motor coach buses and saved his life.
Wow, that's terrific. And
Unbelievable.
you got to see that.
I got to see that from the air in the police helicopter.
Wow, that's really great.
It was incredible.
And
so,
I'm
as much grief and shit
ending.
as the police get, they
do a lot of good.
Cops do a lot of really good things in the world. And
yes, they do.
And I thought those...
and it's a hard job, Tom.
Oh, my God. I couldn't... You imagine the stress?
Oh, and I would be so stressed if one of my kids was doing that, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a rough job. So, and then Ziggy Stardust, that guy's been writing me nice emails for 10 years. I actually met him in Pittsburgh after I did the show at the Improv. That was like 2 weeks before you and I went to Israel. So that was December 2018. So we want to welcome them. I want to welcome them to the Rhodes, Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp family, and thank everybody who supports the podcast in any way. And
thank you.
My mother's praying for you. So not only do you get a postcard every month, but my mother is praying for you. So there's extra value for your money. So I wanted to start off with just a couple of quick stories before, I think I'm going to call this episode Corona University, because we're going to talk about a lot. We're going to talk about the things that we've learned in this past week. You and I are crushing it on art documentaries, and you're reading books. But this past week, I've been working on my album, and it's the edit notes are almost finished. So I don't know how I've got this project popped up, but it took me a few days. I've got boxes full of hard photographs because I've always been into photography and I've always taken pictures around the world. So you're going to make me a quilt with some of my best travel photos. So I need to find like my best travel photos with me in it around the world for this quilt you're going to make me. And then also I want to revive this one-man show idea where I did years ago, where I did like slides, but I want to do my best stories traveling. Who knows? Maybe there's a book or whatever in it. I just need to organize my photos. So I pulled out of the closet these 4 boxes full of hard photographs, and it was great. I organized them and separated them with the best travel photos, the best me photos, me performing, and then friends, and then most importantly, and this is the reason I tell the story, is ex-girlfriends. And I got to separate all these ex-girlfriend pictures. I couldn't want to throw them away because this is my life experience, and like I took a lot of great trips with some of these people I had relationships with. And I found this one photograph, and this particular woman was probably the most cantankerous of all my relationships. And we took a trip once to Grenada, the island of Grenada in the Caribbean. America, we had a war with them once upon a time.
It didn't last long.
It was like a week. I think they surrendered on the first day. But there's a great photo of me on the beach, and I'm wearing a Comedy Central t-shirt, and this woman is braiding my hair. And I told you it was worth the headache of that relationship just for that one photo.
Well, I didn't like that woman you were involved with, but I wasn't going to say it.
Yeah, well, I suspected.
Well, hopefully I treated everyone well while you were together.
You've always treated everybody with class, respect, and dignity, Mom.
Oh, well, that's good.
But the reason I tell the story was, so it was great to find that one photo, but also the best feeling in the world was, to take very large Ziploc bags and put each relationship with these women in different Ziploc bags and then put them in a box and put them deep into my darkest, furthest closet for whatever, years from now. They're not the photos that I want to look at and use. And it was really I thought you had the best sentence. You said, it's like cleaning out the cobwebs from the corners of your life.
Sometimes things come out.
Sometimes you're a very wise, intelligent woman, Mom.
Good grief.
Good grief. Hey, and I want to clarify that I'm not talking about Ashna in any way, because Ashna and I, all of our photos were digital. So there was only like a few photos of us, like hard copy photos of things like riding roller coasters or the Hollywood Forever Cemetery photos. So, and I'm still friends with Ashna. So
Yes.
I'm not referring to her when I'm talking about putting her in a box.
Girlfriends, yeah.
Yeah, and she was my wife. So,
Right.
And I'm grateful that we're still friends and everything. So the other story, I have not been to the grocery store in 2 weeks because we've had enough supplies and we don't want to push it. And
Right.
we've been taking a walk around the neighborhood once a week for just a little sanity and sunshine on the face.
For the first month I was here, I didn't go out.
You didn't go outside for a month.
I know.
You stayed in this one-bedroom apartment.
Yes, as much as I like to walk around in the sunshine. That was hard.
Well,
but,
hey. We've been overly cautious. I think we can loosen it up a little. I mean, we don't take the elevator when we go out. We take the steps. And,
right. And we stay 6 feet away from people, and sometimes we'll walk on the grass in the park just to, I noticed that people are doing the 6 feet away from each other a lot. And that some people have a mask and they take it off until they come near somebody. People are being cautious.
Yeah, it's true.
And they are, of course, a whole bunch of young people that think they're invincible and they don't even have a mask. But, that's being young.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And there was one thing I read in the week about the carelessness of some young people at the moment. And I guess it was a little snarky. They were saying, like with student debt and all this stuff and people without, these young people, they were saying like, why would they care about old people when old people have stacked everything against them? It was, it was one of those opinion pieces.
Young people usually don't think they'll ever get old somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
we all think that.
We all felt invincible when we were younger.
Yeah.
So...
it's amazing how fast life goes, though.
It goes by in a snap.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I remember when... I've said this before on the podcast. There was something when Dad was still alive and I was going through some kind of trouble, and Dad said, whatever is bothering you, you need to find a way to get over it and make yourself happy, because life goes by in a snap. And you'd be better off.
Right.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, you notice that as you get older, and you have less responsibility when the children are out of the house, and things start to slow down a little bit, because when you're home with a bunch of children, it's all you can do to keep things going. Mm-hmm. To keep the clothes clean and the food on the table, and do the best you can with everything that happens.
Yeah.
So when things slow down, you start to think about stuff more.
Well, everybody's got plenty of time to think about things now.
Yes.
So what I wanted to say about going to this, so I hadn't been to the grocery store in 2 weeks, and there's a Trader Joe's 1 block from here. Smartest decision I ever made in my life, to move 1 block from 2 grocery stores. And at Trader Joe's, I don't know if they're doing this at your grocery stores, but it's the Trader Joe's closest to me in Los Angeles, and maybe all of them are doing this now, but it wasn't like this 2 weeks ago. When you go in the store now, they've got arrows on the floor, and you're supposed to follow the arrows. Kind of like when you go to IKEA, and you're going through. When you go to IKEA, it's almost like you're like a game piece on a game board, and you're going forward through the little,
Oh, my friend in Florida said they're doing that.
Okay.
In Publix.
Where you go on a...
it's only one aisle one way, and she said a couple of times she went the wrong way.
Oh, okay.
So
you didn't tell me that.
Oh,
because
sorry.
This is what I learned yesterday.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't realize that. It's new since the last time I went. So if you think, oh shit, I forgot something back in the vegetable aisles, and I actually thought I should get us some salad. So I went back, and this woman, I heard her say, why aren't people following the arrows?
Oh.
And I was the people she was talking about. So I didn't realize that if you forget something, you're not supposed to go back. You're supposed to just grab everything as you're moving forward.
You might have to turn around, like you would a one-way street.
Or, I guess, go through it all and then start back, from the beginning. But anyway, that was a new little occurrence.
Oh, we should have talked.
I had no idea.
I didn't think of it.
I love that you loved the story about the homeless guy in the wheelchair
Oh, goodness.
who jumped up and wanted to fight the security guard
didn't exactly
I heard
love
you,
it, but
I heard
did
you tell all
my
your friends.
I did. Oh,
The hot happenings of California.
Yeah. Well, I don't have much to tell them exactly, but that was an interesting story, which, gives real people who are in a wheelchair a bad name.
Yeah, yeah.
And, then people, when they see this, they become kind of cynical, like, why should you give to these people when they're perfectly able to work, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
It does give them a bad name. It's not a good thing.
Yeah, true. I mean, now if you see a guy with no legs, you got to think, where's he hiding those legs?
Oh, good.
Maybe it's a trick. So let's talk about all the, I had wanted to do, and I finished the book, Napoleon the Great by Andrew Roberts. It's 820 pages. It took me months to read this book. And I had wanted to do a Napoleon episode, but I'm not in the mood for it. There's so many details. I'm sure I'll get around to it eventually, and I highlighted the book. But to think of an entire nation going against their most sacred principles and their hard-earned rights to let a dictator drive their country off the cliff through his ego, it's just something I don't want to wrap my head around right now. So let's talk about the things, because I'm so impressed with the fact that you've been crushing books and you're reading a pretty epic, like the Napoleon book was just so thick and so many details. And you're reading this book that I loved. It's called The Fatal Shore by Robert Hughes. And it's about the epic founding of the country of Australia and the convicts and the prison system in England that sent these people there. And when I was going to Australia a lot, I read that book, and that is full of so many details.
The reason I was reading this book was because the book I read before was something about Paris.
Oh, the Australian guy.
And he who wrote it was an Australian person, and it was so well written. And
that was Paris at the End of the World.
Yeah.
The City of Light during the Great War, 1914, 1918.
That was a really good book, and I thought it was more or less from an Australian perspective. And I thought, well, I don't know that much about Australia. So this Fatal Shore was all about Australia. And in fact, it has so much, you can hardly get it all. This guy, Robert Hughes, must have spent so much time. I don't know how long it took him to really write this book, because it went from every angle you could think of. In the first few years of Australia, the colony was, they were starving, but you can kind of see that maybe they hadn't cleared the land, so what was nearby was sandy beaches, and it started, and it gave you an idea about the laws in England and why these people, because the laws were made for protecting property and not people, and there was a lot of unemployment and all this stuff, so people were tempted to steal just to eat, and so they would be sent to Australia. A lot of them that didn't do that much bad,
Like somebody could steal a loaf of bread.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
And they get sent to it. And then...
because, in a way, it was like get them away from the regular citizens. And it was, in a way, trying to bury your bad news, I guess.
Including get rid of the undesirables of society.
Yes, and that
what I think is interesting about the whole thing is that, to me, Australia is paradise. And I know that people were miserable when they went over there and everything, but, England can be really dreary and wet, and, it's kind of a funny punishment to send people to paradise.
Well, it wasn't paradise the first few years. People were dying all over the place, and they were so badly mistreated. Terrible repercussions for trying to escape, and they were always trying to escape. And this guy goes into so much detail about everything. The convicts were like slaves who built the roads and the buildings and the farms, and people who came to live there could have their own private slave, as the convicts would work, their home.
Contract labor.
Contract labor, and a lot of times, though, well, let me read you a couple of things. Let's see if I could find a couple of things that they called it transportation, getting there. Thus, we can roughly distinguish 4 phases of transportation. The first was primitive transportation, as it were, that runs from 1787 to 1810. It began, as we have seen, as an attempt to clear the English hulls and jails and to post a British strategic presence in the Pacific. It involved relatively few convicts, in round figures about 9,300 men and 2,500 women from England and Ireland, no more than 7% of the total number who would eventually be transported. They started coming out at a rate of about 1,000 people per year, but this fell by half when the Napoleonic Wars began in 1793 because convicts were needed for dockyard work. Some were press-ganged into the Navy or even dragged into the uniformed rabble of the British Army. England could not spare the ships to transport them beyond the seas to Australia. So this guy had pictures, he had quoted letters from people back and forth. It was so very interesting.
I think it's an excellently written book, so full
wonderful.
of information.
So full of information. But it seemed as though, once they started doing well, they would go to another part like New Zealand and Tasmania. And in Tasmania, they wiped out the Aborigines. Their official way to treat the Aborigines was not the way it happened. The story they tell, is it? Well, no, the official stance on how to treat the Aborigines was...
Aboriginals, I think.
Okay, I'm not saying it right, but of course they got the diseases which killed a bunch of them, but after a while they were all bad blood between the settlers, the convicts, and the people that lived there.
The native people.
The native people. And so that was a problem, and they actually exterminated them in Tasmania. There was a lot of sad stories, and he had a ton of sad stories. I mean, it was really a terrible thing to be a convict in those days. They just were treated so badly. And at one point, they kept going to other islands. Norfolk Island, and there was a story that he had said about these people were so bent on trying to get some freedom that they revolted. And there was terrible repercussions because of that. And actually, a bunch of them were going to hang. And the people who they decided would not hang actually cried because they wanted to die so bad.
Wow, they were so unhappy.
It was so terrible.
Wow.
I mean, it was really terrible. I mean, the way he describes it, it's, oh my God. And the ones who were hung were going to be hung. They actually got on their knees and thanked God that they were going to be hung. Oh, it was just horrible. And he had names. This guy had names of people who were going to be hung. And it was interesting that at one point he said the youngest one was William McCullough, and that was my maiden name. My people came from Ireland, and they settled in South America.
From Belfast to Buenos Aires, baby.
Yeah, and my father was always telling us not to get involved in politics or do anything that the police would get involved with. So I wondered what our history was, because nobody was ever telling you the history. But it was almost a personal thing.
When you saw that the McCullough guy got killed.
Yes, it was a little different spelling. O-U-G-H, but ours was A-G-H. Anyway, just to give you an idea how horrible it was, somebody got 100 lashes for saying, "Oh my God," while on the chain gang for mutiny, 100 lashes for smiling while on the chain, 50 lashes for getting a light to smoke, 200 lashes for insolent to a soldier, 100 lashes for striking an overseer who pushed him, 8 months solitary confinement for refusing to work, 3 months of solitary confinement for disobedience of orders, 3 months Gogh. I'm not sure what that is.
Where?
G-A...
That's the old English spelling of jail.
Oh.
It's jail.
Being a short distance from the settlement. He got 3 months for that. 100 lashes before all hands in the I guess jail for insolence to the sentry, 100 lashes for singing a song, 50 lashes for asking Gogh for a chew of tobacco.
Jailer.
100 lashes for neglect of work. I mean, you could hardly breathe, and they would be on you. And people died being beaten like that.
I thought it was interesting. You told me a detail from because I read that book 15 years ago, that a lot of Irish people who were pushing for Irish independence, so basically they were political agitators in the eyes of the English authorities, and that a lot of those people were sent over there to do hard labor just for their political beliefs.
Yes,
and like you said, I mean, it could have been one of our family.
Yes, it could have. Here I wanted to read you something else. Because it was fixated on punishment alone, the old system had gradually maintained crushed, resentful, and embittered men and women in whom the spark of enterprise and hope was dead. So McAnochy, the guy's name, argued exemplary punishment was only vindictive. It ran wild, degrading both convicts and the jailer. Terms like mercy and remission of punishment were to be dropped. Let us offer our prisoners not favors but rights on fixed and unalterable conditions. And there were many people who actually did well, because after they finished their assigned years in jail, like 7 years or 14 years, they would be able to settle there, and sometimes their outlook for a better life was better there than because they would get convicts also to work for them. They could get farms and have convicts work for them. Then the outlook was better than they would have had in England, so they stayed where they were. So they were trying to get people to come to move there. There was a whole group of people just trying to get people to move to Australia and settle. Okay, here I'll read you one last
free
thing.
Slave labor.
Yeah, it was free. That's it. You know, it's money.
Or maybe they had to pay
money.
A little something to the authorities.
Let's see, Gibbs, a gallant veteran of the Peninsular War and a striking, prudent, and humane governor, did all he could to ease the transition of the labor supply from convicts to immigrants. The bounty system, approved by the Colonial Office in 1837, helped considerably. It gave £30 to every able-bodied migrant couple under the age of 30 and £5 to each of their children. Single men, sponsored by settlers, were underwritten to the tune of £10 each, and respectable spinsters between the ages of 15 and 30, if they came out with under the protection of a married couple, got £15. Before long, 18,000 free immigrants had arrived in New South Wales on the bounty system, and over 40,000 on their own initiative. This was more than enough to fill the gap in the labor supply. So the Eden 1, the last convict transport to arrive in New South Wales under the old system, dropped her 269 male passengers at Sydney Cove on November 18, 1840. And he just goes into such wonderful detail. Some of it, of course, was hard to read, how they treated the convicts, but it also had some really interesting things to say about Tasmania and how the whales that were there got sort of wiped out, and so did the seals that used to be there. I guess they didn't all get wiped out, but
they did a good job of wiping them out.
They really did a number on them. It's a really good book.
Don't you find, like in the situation that we're experiencing now, and you and I both know we're grateful to be where we're at for this, but a lot of people are suffering. A lot of people are going through some unprecedented mental anguish at the moment because of this coronavirus thing. Don't you find that kind of reading history about people who had it much worse?
Oh my goodness!
Doesn't it kind of make you feel better? Because like the Napoleon
I don't know.
book,
It made me feel like when I was reading how they were starving and what they were eating, it was terrible, because then you'd fix dinner and it was a wonderful dinner, and it was like, oh my God. I'm reading about these people having such a horrendous time, and I'm not, so it was... Oh, in a way, you feel kind of guilty, like, wow.
Well, but I like, reading about Napoleon's retreat from Russia, and he left those soldiers, and they had to fend for themselves, and it's winter, and like there's like most of them didn't make it back to France.
Right.
This like horrendous human suffering, and it kind of makes you think, wow, well, our current situation isn't that bad. I'm not being whipped 50 times because I asked a jailer for a light. Or
smiled.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to think about these things. But, we do miss our modern things. Like in Florida, I remember, listening to the news while we were having a hurricane, and somebody was complaining that they couldn't watch, the electricity had gone off in their area or something. They couldn't watch their favorite TV show. And I thought, good grief, we're in the middle of a hurricane, and they're worried about not watching their favorite TV show.
Yeah, well, you remember the movie, what was it? The Right Stuff. Remember the movie The Right Stuff? And it was about the space mission to go to the moon. And in that movie, the thing that stood out for me is, this unbelievable human achievement of sending men to the moon. And the moon landing was being televised live. And
I remember seeing it on live TV.
And the guy from NASA was saying that the television networks got tons of complaints because the daytime soap operas had been taken off.
Oh, good grief.
So people they cared more about their... Not everybody, of course. This is a few select assholes. But I love, your curiosity and thirst for learning is... I definitely get this from you. And you reading Robert Hughes's The Fatal Shore was one of the last books I thought you would have picked off the shelf to read. So I think it's really...
Well, it took, it was not an easy read. I read every word. I don't skim because I want to get...
Who reads like that?
I don't know, but I read every word. And sometimes it's hard, to picture in your mind what's happening to these poor people. But when you're a settler, like the people that came to this country, they never saw their families, a lot of them, again. And it wasn't easy. Nothing's easy that you don't know whether you're going to come back. Like those people going to the moon, I mean, they have to be really brave to... there's no guarantee you're coming back,
Well, I do have one loyal Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp listener in Sydney, Australia, one of my favorite cities in the world. I showed you, it was cool. We watched that thing the other day. Or we'll talk about that later, about how I had gone on top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
Oh, yeah.
But this guy, Shane, who... he runs a fruit and vegetable stand in a farmer's market.
Wow.
And I follow the guy on Instagram, and Australia's on an opposite season than we are. So
right.
I always enjoy seeing the fruits and vegetables that this guy is posting at his produce stand, because it's the opposite of what's in season here. So I'm sure...
I love looking at those fruits and vegetables, which is kind of silly, but... I really like to see fresh, just because they're so beautiful. And when I was painting, it's really terrific to look at the different shades of
and I showed you a lot of my travel photos around the world. I always take pictures of produce stands
because they're so different.
I love the colors.
Yeah, and the colors, yeah,
they're beautiful.
Yeah, and
who doesn't like fruits and vegetables? And that is the benefit of, or the nice thing about my podcast is smaller than a lot of the very famous huge money making podcasts, but the benefit is that I know most of my listeners by name.
That's always good. It's like family.
Yeah. So and then we had forgot to talk about this the last time because it wasn't on the table, but you had also read this book about the life of the artist Goya. Which,
I did.
But I forget who wrote the book. Francisco. I wrote it down. Books that my mother read.
Well, it was
I'll find
a pretty interesting book. And he lived during the Inquisition in Spain, which was a hard time for people there, because anybody could accuse you. Anything could be, subject to the Inquisition and torture. And he was brought up on charges, but somehow, because, he had friends in high places, he got out of it and was not tortured and stuff. But he went to France for a while and came back. He was kind of an odd person, and he bought a house and painted the walls with horrible pictures. I mean, nightmares. Had this... It was just... I guess he painted all these nightmares he had on the bottom floor and the top floor. The walls were covered with horrible pictures of monsters eating people, and just awful. So I just can't... He must have been a warped personality to live in a house where...
Those were rough times during the Inquisition,
it was,
and
I'm
they
sure
could grab your shit,
he saw
torture
some
you.
really horrible stuff, and I'm sure he heard even more horrible stuff.
So the book you read is called Francisco Goya, A Life by Evan S. Connell. Mm-hmm. And then we'll use that to segue in. The last episode you and I talked about, we had watched the first half of it's called The Great Artists with Tim Marlow. And there's like great. 40 episodes, something like that. So the last time we had talked, we had watched the first half. And then in the last week we watched, and they're only like a half hour, and you and I both think they must have been done for like university art classes, because they're like, I think they're like 25 minutes long each, but they're about the lives of artists. And on that episode of Goya that he did, I thought it was interesting. He said, women reclining naked have a long, rich history in art. And some of Goya's most famous paintings are of naked women reclining. And then there was the one painting where this woman is reclining naked, and then he also painted her reclining but clothed.
And there was some kind of a story also in that book that I read about Goya, that somehow they had fixed a way of, you could look at the painting, and there she was naked, and they would slide.
Oh, that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Where, like, I never even considered that. I never knew that. Where, like, a lot of rich men would have, like, maybe their mistress painted naked and reclining or whatever, not pornographic, what we call, fine art these days. So they would have it in a private room covered by a curtain, and they could invite, their buddies in and pull back the curtain and say, look, this is my mistress. Like that,
or she, on that painting, she would be dressed, and then all of a sudden,
she's naked.
They slide the the other painting, and she could be naked, or vice versa. It was kind of interesting. And then also, I thought that watching all these programs, one right after the other, I mean, it was almost like eating popcorn or something. But there was a thing that seemed to unite them, because, like, the famous painters from centuries ago, either somebody in their family, or they themselves, or their wife or children would die from epidemics. There was a lot of that. And
a lot of plagues would come.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
That was interesting
to see in these times we're living now. How that was pretty common for plagues to wipe out.
The plague of 16 something, or that's what they would call them. Or, of course, the real bad one, the Black Plague.
Black Plague.
Yeah, that wiped out like a fourth of Europe. But besides that everybody knows about that one, they had other plagues. And another thing that they seemed to have in common was that the artists would have an affair with their models, and sometimes they would actually get married. And another thing that I thought was interesting, that seemed to be a thread following all these artists, was that sometimes they didn't get paid for their work, or they had to fight about the payment. And there was a story that, like,
or even like sue, and then they wouldn't get paid for years later, until years later.
But before people sued, they would have a problem getting paid. Like, there was a story that the guy that painted, that escapes my mind right now, the Mona Lisa, the person who had that painting commissioned him to paint that painting, was not happy with it and didn't want to pay. So, it takes a long time to make a wonderful painting.
Was that the Mona Lisa?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I told you I think the whole reason that painting was invented in the first place was to get women to take their clothes off.
Well, this is portraiture, not...
No, but you're talking about them sleeping with their models and sometimes ending up... I'm joking, of course.
Yeah, but it was interesting to see how that thread ran through a lot of their lives.
I think I told you there was when I lived in Amsterdam, I made friends with this guy. He was friends. He was a guest on my late night talk show, and he was an art expert. And then I got to hang out with him and have some drinks after the show, and we were talking, and he told me, as an art dealer, he said if the advice he gives the people is always invest in female nudes, because female nude paintings never lose their value. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
That was his opinion.
Yeah. Probably correct.
So, was there something else you wanted to say?
Yeah, on the one about Whistler.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're going to go through the list.
Okay.
So this was the last half of the Tim Marlow Great Artists series. Bruegel, which was Bruegel the Younger and Bruegel the Elder, but I think this is the younger. And he specialized in dark humor. Remember that guy? There was all these they're fantastic paintings, but there's always there's a lot of humorous little things happening in it, and he wrote in all these, painted in all of these kind of parables and morality things.
That was really interesting.
And the thing I thought was interesting, it was a dead guy, and the way Tim Marlow explained it was that if you fear nothing, you will come to a sticky end, which I guess was an old Dutch expression.
He had a painting with all
like
these
sticky
old,
as in bloody dead.
All these Dutch expressions. Must have had like 20 different ones.
I love Dutch expressions.
It was really
like when I lived there was so many. Now the monkey's coming out of the sleeve. If you're born a dime, you'll never be a quarter. All these Dutch expressions. You learn how to ride on an old bike. The Dutch expressions are amazing, and that's what I really fell in love with Bruegel from watching that series.
It was pretty interesting, and
cause he was funny.
Yeah, he was.
So then they talked about Caravaggio.
Oh, of course, your favorite.
I love Caravaggio. Got the posters. We saw. I took you to Rome, and we saw.
Yes, we went all around trying to find Caravaggio paintings, and it was so funny that. They would be in these churches, and you'd have to put some money in. The churches were kind of dark, so they had a thing on the side
a box
where you had
put
to
a euro,
and it would light for just long enough for you to take a quick picture.
Like 30 seconds. They didn't even give you a minute.
And you had to put some more money in. They were making some money on those things.
Cheap ass Italians.
Well, it was interesting, and then we'd go to another.
Why not pay an admission and leave the lights on?
Well, people wanted to see these paintings, and maybe they put them in dark spots of the church.
But it's kind of a thin church, like this one right here. I forget, that's the martyrdom of St. Matthew, or I forget what it's called. And then the other one is the conversion of St. Matthew.
Yes, that one was really good.
They're big paintings, and it's a thin church, and they're kind of at a side angle.
Uh-huh.
So even if you put the euro in and the lights pop on for 30 seconds, you're not standing in the front of it looking at it fully. You're kind of
directly, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they figured the best way to make some money on that, because people wanted to see these paintings.
And then the next step with them, there was an episode on Rembrandt, which you and I both love Rembrandt.
Yes.
I've taken you to the Rembrandt house.
Yes, that was
in Amsterdam.
Really cool. We saw them, how they would mix paint in the old days.
Yeah, they have his painting room set up the way it was supposed to be. Because Rembrandt went bankrupt, they have a detailed list of all of his possessions and what his rooms were like. So they've tried to recreate the room that he painted in, and then there was a person in there given an exhibition on like how they used to crush and make the paints and everything.
And that was really interesting.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And Rembrandt was bad with his money, and so he had like a curiosity room, which a lot of rich Europeans had back then, where there'd be shells and animal
More like
things,
museums.
He would buy war helmets so he could paint them more authentically for the paintings, or like turtle shells.
I remember a stuffed armadillo. I remember
stuffed armadillo.
Wow.
What I remember about that room is he had like 6 or 8 tortoise shells. So he was really bad with his money, and then he ends up going bankrupt. And so he would go, your ships are coming in from all over the world. The Dutch are out exploring the world, and they're bringing back things that... Curiosities that, the Dutch people had never seen before. So he's buying up all this weird shit at the docks so he can paint them more authentically. And I could see him coming home from one of these little dock auctions, and his wife saying, "Not another fucking turtle shell."
Good
dude, you've got 6.
It was more like a museum. He had like a museum room. But it was pretty interesting what he thought was interesting. I couldn't get over the armadillo. I thought, wonder where he got that, because we have them
they're indigenous to Florida, but not to Holland. They must have thought that was the
really
strangest
exotic.
thing in the world.
Really exotic.
I've got to have it. How many guilders do you want for that? So then they talked about Goya, which we just talked about. And then the French painter David, who was was he a painter or was he a propagandist? Because he painted the painting of Marat, which is his most famous painting of the French Revolution guy who's in his bathtub and he's got a letter.
Yeah.
I always thought he was writing a letter, but after I read, where is it? The Paris in the Terrors by Stanley Loomis, Charlotte Corday assassinated the guy. She lived in Cannes.
Actually, I was for her. She should have assassinated. Somebody should have assassinated him. He was terrible. And what he was writing was a list of people that needed to go to the guillotine. Anybody who crossed him or anything.
So she said, I have information on the Girondins. That was the political party he was against. And they had fled to Cannes, where she was from. And she tricked him, and she came in, and the reason he let her in, he had this bad skin disease. When the revolution was starting and the king was still in power, these soldiers were out breaking shit up. He had to jump into a sewer and hide there in shit and piss for hours until it was clear to come out again. So he was left with this horrific skin disease. So he was in such pain, he would have to soak in a brass bathtub for hours every day and whatever, salts. So he's taking his daily bath, and she said, I have information on the Girondins who have fled to Cannes. And he pulls out a pen and a piece of paper and he says, give me their names and I'll have them guillotined by the end of the week. And that's when she pulls out the knife and kills him. But David paints it like it looks like he's a heroic figure.
Well, he's innocent, and the woman had, of course, she got guillotined. But, I'm not saying people should kill somebody who have a different opinion than you. But well,
that's what I find most remarkable about the French Revolution, why I find it so fascinating. To hate your political opponent so much, you would want to chop all of their heads off.
Well, I think that's terrible, and I'm so glad that we didn't do that in our country. People didn't go around guillotining everybody who...
Yeah, but to see your political opponent as subhuman and worthy of death is a very... obviously, it's a human instinct.
Bad thing.
That's like the Inquisition.
Yeah, well,
there's
the
something
Inquisition was about the same way. And talking about the...
I think that was more trickery.
Fatal, sure. They were a lot of people who told on each other. This is what happens when you have like a police state. There will be people that...
Snitches.
Snitch. But, they might...
Well, the Inquisition was like that. Like, that person might be Jewish, or that person doesn't eat pork. And then they would torture them. And tortured.
And it may or may not be true, but when you're being tortured, you probably sign anything like, okay, yes, I did that, and maybe you didn't do it, but you want the torture to stop. So
David, when he was younger, he had a fencing accident that left him with a tumor and a slur in his speech, and he was hard to understand, which I didn't know that. And then so he goes on. So he did the propaganda painting of Marat to make him look like a hero, and then Napoleon comes to power, and he's the one that painted those most famous paintings of like Napoleon crossing the Alps. And he's on this white horse, and the horse is reared up, and he's got like a cape. And so I think, he was a very talented painter, but he was more of a propagandist than he was, a painter. But I guess, we all use our talents. So then there was Turner, which you and I watched. We both have a lesser opinion of Turner now after watching that movie.
Beautiful paintings that he did, but he was not a nice person.
And then they talked about Vermeer, which Delft is one of my favorite places in Holland, and that really it gave me the desire to want to go back to Delft the next time I go back to Holland. Vermeer, there's less than 40 known Vermeer paintings in existence, and they are among the most valuable paintings in the history of art. And Vermeer was married for 20 years, and he had 15 children. So maybe that's why there's less than 40 paintings. The guy was obviously busy making babies. But he died penniless, and his wife had 2 paintings left of his, and she had to sell them because of debts. And then there was like different the Spanish were in control of Holland, and then I think there was a war with the French. He lived, the end of his life was very difficult circumstances, and to think of that guy who painted such tranquil scenes of family life and women doing.
They were beautiful paintings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to think that the end of that guy's life was full of struggle and hardship, and that his wife had to sell the last 2 paintings of his.
Yeah, a lot of artists had really difficult lives.
So then after Vermeer was Stubbs. I think that was the English guy that did the horses.
That was interesting. I'd never heard of him before. And there was a story where he dissected a horse in his house to see how the horse was made, more or less, so he could paint them better. He did beautiful paintings of horses.
And then also he had gotten paid money to do illustrations. So he would dissect these horses and do illustrations of the dissection, and then what a horse's skeletal system looks like.
Yeah.
So I mean,
that was interesting, but it was, oh my gosh, doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but painters did that all along, just trying to figure out how people, their insides, and then doctors did too, to see how the systems in our bodies worked, which it sounds pretty gory, like they'd go and to a place where the dead people were and try to dissect them.
Yeah, kind of creepy. But, then Rembrandt did one of his early, I think he was 27 when he did the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp.
Yes, that was...
And that was the painting that put him on the map for Dutch society guilds or rich people, that for them to do like their self-portrait, or not self-portrait, like individual portraits or like team photos of like the night watchman and different things like that.
Yeah, and when you think of it, you think how gory this whole thing was. But like the doctors...
So he shows that arm as being dissected.
How the circulation...
Like the tendons in the arm or something.
System would work. But there was a story about this guy in the Civil War that I read about years ago. If I remember correctly, he had a wound in his stomach, and somehow the hole never quite healed, and some doctor would figure out the acids in your stomach digesting the food. That's how he found out how that worked. It was because of this guy in the Civil War that had a hole in his stomach. All this stuff helped us now with the medicines and stuff that we have. So when you think about how gory it was, it did have a good ending, more or less, because the majority of human beings were helped by it. So I guess it was a good reason to dissect dead people.
It helped us later,
Yeah, although just the idea of it is pretty gory.
Yeah, well, somebody had to do it. Like, somebody's got to work on it. Who knows what people are, scientists and doctors are doing now to come up with a vaccine.
Now,
what gruesome shit they have to study and investigate to crack the code on this thing. The next painter, Constable. I don't remember anything about Constable. Do you remember that one?
I just remember his name. I think he was landscapes, beautiful landscapes.
These episodes were so good,
and they were one right after the other.
I hope they're on YouTube. Hopefully people could watch these. And then Delacroix was after Constable, and he did it's the symbol of France. The woman carrying the French flag. I actually did a joke about about that. I don't know if you remember that joke about, I love Paris because Paris is very much about honoring women. All over Paris are statues of women, and all their artwork is always women. And it's usually centered around themes of the French Revolution. And if you're familiar with French art of that period, the women usually have a titty hanging out. There's the famous Delacroix painting. I know you've seen it. It's the symbol of France. This woman is carrying a French flag, and there's a dirty-faced pistol boy next to her, and her titty's hanging out. It's almost like French artists of that period had a conversation amongst themselves. Oh, it is feasible. A titty would have popped out. It was a revolution. There was lots of activities. Straps were not that strong. I bet titties must have popped out all the time. It's what a titty does.
Good grief.
So that was interesting. I really like Delacroix. Did you have any thoughts on him?
No.
I don't remember the details of his life, but then the next one was Whistler. And he's famous for Whistler's mother. He was very tight with his mother. Although I think she was kind of a crabby person, it seemed.
No. He's got a really good painting, and she's all in black. But the guy explained everything so well. You know, just watching these paintings that I had seen before, you know, that are famous, he would point things out that I did not notice. Like, how could you not notice, you know? But he would point something out and say what it meant. It was really, really interesting. Like, you know, you go to a museum, an art museum, and there's all these paintings, and you're trying to take it in and look at each one, but there's more to the painting than meets the eye a lot of times. And this guy, what was his name?
Whistler.
No, the one that...
Delacroix.
The guy who was doing this program.
Tim Marlow.
Yes, he would point things out that you didn't see at first, or if you had seen it, he chose something else that you didn't quite get, or what it meant and everything. It was very, very interesting.
I thought Whistler's life was interesting. I didn't know much about that guy. I only knew the Whistler's mother painting, but he was an interesting guy. He leaves America a couple years before the Civil War, and he goes and he lives in London. And then he was a part of these different art movements. His life was really fascinating. And then you had the story about some guy had hired him to do this peacock room.
Freer Art Gallery in Washington, D.C. The last time I went to Washington, I went to the Freer Art Gallery, and the guy had commissioned Whistler to do his dining room. And so they had the dining room there. I transferred it from wherever it was originally painted. I think it was the Freer guy who commissioned Whistler to do this room, and he had to take a trip. And he had told him he wanted the room to be mostly red. So he left and went on his trip, and when he came back, it was not a red room. It was dark green. A beautiful room, but it was dark green. I remember it was pretty dark green for my taste, but it was a beautiful room, and it had gold peacocks, so that's why they called it the peacock room. And the peacocks were absolutely beautiful, big peacocks. And it looked like it had a heavy Chinese look or Japanese look to the room. It was a beautiful room, but of course the guy wanted a red room, and he landed with a green room. So there was a problem about getting paid, you know.
Oh yeah, he had to sue the guy to get paid.
They went back and forth on that, and I think Mr. Freer never was happy with the green room, so he donated it to the museum.
Well, it's cool that they kept it intact.
It's absolutely beautiful. It's a beautiful room. Not my taste, but a beautiful room.
Yeah, I thought that one was really interesting. I should watch it again because now that we're talking about it, I can't remember half the details, but I thought the guy's life was really fascinating. So we had two more of those episodes. Van Gogh, which, and we've already watched several documentaries.
And I love the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam.
We love Van Gogh, but the more you learn about his life,
it's sad.
He was kind of a creep. Well, he fell in love with the wrong women. So he's young and he falls in love with this cousin of his, and she was just widowed. Her husband had just died, and then he proposes to marry her, and it really creeps her out. She says, "Look, I'm still in mourning for my husband," and then she leaves, and that was like an embarrassing episode in his family, and then later, I don't know how long after this was, but he moves to The Hague, Den Haag, and falls in love with an alcoholic prostitute who has a child. And he thinks this is the one. And he catches syphilis from her. And then she doesn't want to give up working. He wants to make her like a nice housewife. And she's an alcoholic and has no intention of giving up her prostitute work. So
it's pretty sad.
Yeah,
the whole thing's pretty sad, and the people in the town he lived in actually
Arla
signed a paper to have him
after he cut off his part of his ear and was put in the nut house. The people of the town Arla, which I went to visit, they signed a petition to have him removed from the town.
Yeah, wow.
Could you imagine being such a dick that everyone in the town circulates a petition to get you to leave?
Well, that shows you what a strong personality he had, and that was not good, that he must have been...
he probably was an over the top and very intense individual.
Intense.
I love his paintings. We all love his paintings, but it's just amazing that he only sold one painting in his lifetime.
That was pitiful.
All those beautiful sunflower paintings and
like Starry, Starry Night.
Starry, Starry Night.
Yeah, just he had so many beautiful paintings, and he worked very hard, and he did so much, but his personal life was an absolute mess, and his friend Gauguin was afraid of him. So
and Gauguin he was doing Vincent's brother Theo a favor by going there in the first place. Van Gogh wanted to make an art commune in Arla the way the Japanese artists had these little art communes. So he had this great idea that he couldn't get other painters to move there and go along with it. And apparently Gauguin was doing, and Gauguin was he left his wife and kids to go be an artist and live in Tahiti.
Yeah, and in the Van Gogh Museum, I thought it was interesting that they had two paintings side by side of the same subject, and one was by Van Gogh and the other one by Gauguin. They were looking at the same thing, but they interpreted it so different. That was pretty interesting.
Well, I have the Book of Letters, Vincent van Gogh's Book of Letters. They've got all of his letters, and then there's another book I have of Gauguin's letters, and that one's called Letters of a Savage.
Huh.
So...
not a happy title, but that might be interesting.
And then, so we loved this great artist series with Tim Marlow, and then it kind of ended on a weird note with this artist I had never heard of, Schiele.
I had not heard of him either. I did not like his work.
So he was like painting in like 1917 and the 19-teens in Vienna, and he was a hedonist. He's out observing all these sex parties and prostitute low-life scenario, the underworld of Vienna, if you will.
Well, Tim Marlow, was that the guy that was doing this, was trying to show his paintings and say good things about them, but all I could see was like this guy was obsessed with sexual organs, and I just did not appreciate his work. I'm sorry, but I just did not appreciate his work.
I think everybody listening to this will give you a free pass to not like something, Mom.
Well,
from all those artists.
Somebody might really love it, and well, that's why we're all different. And we're unique.
Art is subjective, comedy subjective, everything is.
Which is
he wasn't your cup of tea.
No, he definitely was not my cup of tea.
Hey, I want to ask you about an expression you use, and I've never heard anyone else use this expression. Because I always love the expression, not my cup of tea. My favorite expression is, that's how the cookie crumbles.
Oh.
But you often use this expression, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Oh, good grief.
Where did you pick that up?
I'm not sure. The bottom line, more or less.
Yeah.
It's the bottom line.
I like that one. It's a good one.
For sure, other people say that.
I've never heard anyone else say that,
No.
no. That's Sarah Rhodes' classic.
Oh, well, it's not original.
Right, but I mean, like,
I wonder where
I loved in Holland all these different expressions that they had. I remember Anique's father once said, you can shit on my table, but don't get any on my plate.
Huh.
So that's apparently some old Dutch expression that's been around for a couple hundred years. So I think expressions are very fascinating and interesting.
Yes, it is.
Where the rubber meets the road.
My father used to say bloody all the time. Bloody this and bloody that. Very English.
Yeah, and I remember when we were kids and we were being little hellions, you would say, it's a blood-sucking madhouse in here. And me and Laura always loved that. Like, that's like the worst, most chaotic situation.
Yeah.
It's a blood-sucking madhouse in here.
That might have been what my father used to say.
I love that. That's a classic, and that probably comes from England or.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we got two last things to talk about. I mean, you get what a knowledge-filled week we've had, reading and watching these things, and
right.
After the Tim Marlow Great Artists series, we started to watch. It's another BBC, or that wasn't. Tim Marlow wasn't BBC, but this was a BBC thing, and it's called Around the World in 80 Treasures with Dan Cruikshank, and it was a quest for the highest achievements of human history all around the world. And so he had chosen these, it was interesting, like in America, he chose the 1851 Colt revolver that had six. For the first time, you could shoot 6 bullets instead of 1, and you could do a lot of damage.
Well, I think he was trying to point out that when they thought about America, they thought about cowboys. And the was the one that...
not only cowboys, just the firepower of having more than 1 bullet in your revolver kind of changed, not just for cowboys, but for... human history. You're a badass, and you can call the shots if you can kill more than 1 person in a quick amount of time.
Well, they showed how to take the gun apart, and it looked fairly simple. I'm not sure how simple it would be. I'm all thumbs myself, but it seemed simple when they were showing you how to take it apart.
I think it is. That's another thing. It's not complicated. It's easy to clean. It's easy to put it back together. So he started out in Peru, which I liked, and then we'll end this episode when we talk about the time scanner thing we watched afterwards, because that ended in Peru. Yeah. So I like the Dan Cruikshank thing. Started in Peru with the Incas, and then he goes to Brazil, and then he goes to America. And then, did he go straight to Australia after that?
Goodness.
So
he kept showing a picture of the world, and the next place was, red dots. But I don't really remember exactly where he went after.
But it's interesting, and especially now, I think it's good to be reminded of humanity's the good things we've done, or the highest achievements, and. I don't know how. I think this series it was probably done 15, 20 years ago. And I had it on DVD.
Never heard of some of these places. Some of it I did hear. He'd say, "Oh, this is great, but it's not my treasure." It's kind of like he was
teasing you.
Yeah, like okay, he's going to show you a treasure, but he's not going to tell you what it is.
Right, like in Sydney, he goes to the Sydney Opera House, and he's telling you all these details about the Sydney Opera House, and I've been there, I've touched it, I've been inside. I love the Sydney Opera House.
Yeah, and then he said,
and
that's not the
he goes,
treasure.
That's not one of my treasures that I've chosen.
And you're going, oh, what is then, you know?
But he chose that old church, and this goes back to the Fatal Shore book that you read. I forget the name of the church, but it's an old church in Sydney, and they had made it 50 years after Australia had first started sending the convicts. It was a beautiful church. So. And he chose it because the former convicts, they said, we're going to be a world-class city, and we're going to build a world-class church. So I thought that was an interesting choice. And then he didn't choose the Sydney Harbour Bridge, which he should have, I think. It's a magnificent structure, and I got to tell you the story about how I've been to the top.
Yeah, that was.
So there was a period about 10, 15 years ago when I was going to Sydney twice a year to do the Comedy Store, and there was a woman that worked at the club, and her boyfriend they gave tours on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So normally when you go up the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and you literally hike up the top on this.
Well, when I saw it on the thing, and you said you'd done that, I was happy. I didn't know you had done that. It was like, oh my God.
So you go up in groups, and you have a thing around your waist, and you have to hook it on to this cable that runs all the way up for your safety, because people get blown off from the wind. It's so, you're up there. So this guy, because he gave the tours, he gave me a private tour, so we didn't go on the right cable where all the groups are. We went on the left cable, and he and I went straight up. And I don't have the problem with heights that you do, but heights make me nervous. And looking down, is friggin'
I would have had an attack.
Pretty terrifying. But I worked my way through the fear because I wanted to do this once in my life. So he told me a great story. I said, do people ever freak out up at the top? And he said, yeah, it happens all the time. He said, usually it'll be some big muscular guy, some big tough guy, and you think that's a tough guy, and they freeze up there, and they latch on to
I would have frozen.
They latch onto a girder or a railing, and they won't let go. And he said what they have to do is they have to get a team of workers up there and pry the person's fingers off.
Oh gosh, yes.
He said they're so terrified that they'll just cling to a thing and won't let go.
I can sympathize. I can definitely sympathize.
I wish I could. I think that's got to be a digital photo of me up on the top. It's such a great, cool place.
Well, I'm glad I didn't know about it at the time.
But the thing I was going to say, and it's what I love about England, and this BBC show, Around the World in 80 Treasures with Dan Cruikshank, in England they still put ugly people on television. So he's an older guy. He's in his 60s, maybe 70s. And England specializes in, like, people who are, like, experts on, like, a certain topic. And they'll let him, like, we love Simon Sharma, who's done a lot of different BBC specials. But this guy, I know you were irritated a few times where he was whispering. And, like, why is the guy
whispering?
But he's just like a passionate nerd.
Yeah.
Who's getting like that? I think that was at the temples of Angkor.
Oh, and he climbed. He was in good shape because he had to climb all these ancient steps. Like the Mexican.
Oh, in Chichen Itza, the pyramid.
Yeah.
Which you're not allowed to climb anymore.
Huh. Well,
the first time I went, I got to climb it.
Yeah. He was climbing lots and lots of steps and stuff. And so, going through small spots too.
He went down into some tunnels.
Tunnels and stuff.
He had some special access because he was with the BBC.
Yeah.
And that's when he started whispering. And these people.
Oh, my gosh.
And these things. And they were
Well, it was like he's showing you a treasure that so he was trying to do that, but there was nobody around as far as I could tell. He shouldn't have been whispering, but...
Well, I love super nerds who have a lot of specialized information.
Well, he definitely did, and I didn't know half the stuff that he showed in that program, which was really interesting,
Yeah, and then I didn't know at the temples in Angkor, which I've got the painting and the photo I took of the temples of Angkor in Cambodia, where there was this. Angkor Wat was built by the Jayavarman, this king, and then he died, and then there was a war between the brothers for the power. And so a lot of things we had seen these stories, like the Taj Mahal we'll talk about in a minute, is always a story, a story with brothers having a problem throughout history. And all these different things. And like I kept saying to you, again with the brothers.
Well, people who were kings and stuff, they would kill each other for the power. They always did have a problem. Well, that's how
goes back went. To Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. I was just thinking that. Yeah. Cain and Abel. Boy. Yeah.
So unfortunately, the last two DVDs didn't work, so we don't know what Dan Cruikshank chose as treasures in Europe. But it's going like he did the Terracotta Warriors in China.
He had lots of really interesting stuff.
Interesting stuff around the world,
yeah. and kind of after a while, his whispering didn't bother me too much. I guess at first it did.
Well, I just love that England still puts ugly people on television and even old people on television who have valuable knowledge to share.
And he was in good shape. Climbing all those stairs. I mean, good grief. Even a young person might have had a problem.
He went hand gliding with the condors in Peru. Oh, my
goodness. That was amazing. Yeah. Imagine doing that.
But the thing I found the most interesting was when he went to India and told the story about the Taj Mahal, which this is such a symbol of love, and that he made it for his favorite wife. And I had heard this story before, I had read it before, but he opened my eyes to it, that actually is like a mausoleum. He built that for his favorite wife after she was dead.
Right.
He was Muslim. It's built out of white marble. She had 20 children for him, and she died. And then it was a struggle between, so he has a stroke, and I think there was 4 brothers, and then they go to war, and then it was the asshole brother who gained the power, and he kept his father prisoner.
Yes, that was. So he could see.
He could see the Taj Mahal from where he was being.
And that was terrible.
And he couldn't speak because he had a stroke. Yeah. But what I found interesting, so aside from there's another story of asshole brothers fighting,
yeah,
was that his original plan was across the water from the white marble Taj Mahal for his wife. He was going to build a black marble Taj Mahal that represented him. So originally, the Taj Mahal was supposed to be like a salt and pepper shaker looking thing with a white one and a black one across the water from each other.
Of course, that was never built.
Because the asshole brother took charge, and what did he build that anybody remembers?
I don't think he built anything. Yeah, it's easier to destroy than to build.
Yeah, true. So from there, then the last thing we watched on our week of learning, it was a National Geographic show called Time Scanners. where these scientists or research people, they took a mobile laser scanning device and they went to, they did Petra, they did St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and then what else did they?
Coliseum.
The Coliseum in Rome. Oh, they did the pyramids in Egypt, the Coliseum in Rome, and then the last two, which I found the most interesting, was the walls of ancient Jerusalem. I guess Solomon built these walls when it was Solomon's temple, right?
Yeah.
And that was really interesting.
You can just see the foundations now because, Solomon's temple was destroyed.
Well, the temple was destroyed, but the walls of the city are still there.
Yeah, the underpinnings of the original temple, and that's what they were studying, and it was really interesting.
And then they scanned the Wailing Wall,
yes,
also, which is the most sacred place in Judaism, and you and I went there. It's so cool to see these places.
It's sort of personal.
It's so cool to know that we've been there.
We were there, and you touched those stones.
Like they showed this one scene, one aerial shot, and it's the Lion's Gate. When you come out and you actually go down this long road, it goes down a hill, and then across the street is the Church of All Nations, and then behind that is I think it's the Church of Mary Magdalene. It looks like a Russian Orthodox church, but it's a hill upwards, a big tall hill, and that's where the Mount of Olives. It's the Mount of Olives there.
Yeah.
So they showed this aerial shot, and you and I had gone to the Mount of Olives, and then on the top of that hill is where Jesus ascended to heaven, which should be a nicer. They should make a nicer dome thing on there, because the Temple of the Rock, where Muhammad ascended to heaven, is that gold dome thing. But then we both loved the Church of All Nations,
that was beautiful.
Mosaic tiles
Just
in
beautiful.
there.
The whole church was beautiful.
It's not Jesus on the cross; it's Jesus on the Mount of Olives. So I remember walking back, because we're going to go up that road that takes you to the Lion's Gate. We jaywalked. I thought we had the walk sign, and these people were turning left, and we're crossing the street, and the guy honked at us, and I go, "We got the walk!" And I pointed to the green walk guy, but it was like,
we were wrong.
It was the way they are in Europe, where there's be like a don't walk guy for the first half, and then there's a green walk guy across the road.
You're only supposed to go halfway.
You're only supposed to go halfway or not.
Yeah.
And I thought we had the walk. So it was funny, they showed the aerial shot of ancient Jerusalem, and I go, "Oh, remember when we got honked and yelled at as we crossed that street there?"
Yeah.
So it's cool that we have a personal
It was really interesting. And how they did, like the first one they showed, that they have a structural engineer trying to tell you what all this stuff meant, all this laser scanner information. They would scan the whole thing, and then the structural engineer would tell you how they built it. He would figure it out. And the one we saw about that cathedral in London was real interesting, because he figured that the building was built on clay and that it had buckled. But the guy, Oliver Wren, I think was the builder, he figured out how to fix it as he was building this thing to almost perfectness. It was just a matter of 3 inches that was the difference. And this guy, Steve Burrows, the structural engineer, saw how they had corrected the building as it went up. It was really amazing, and on top they had a round dome, and it really was like an illusion, because it wasn't, the roundness wasn't what was keeping it up there. It was a cone shape that was the weight bearer. How they figured this stuff and how these people built this things and corrected their mistake as they went was fantastic. Then when he did the pyramids, I thought was so interesting. He didn't go directly to like the pyramid in Giza. That was the one he was aiming for, but he went to see some pyramids that did not work that well, to see how they learned how to build the pyramid shape that we're all familiar with. So he went to he looked at 3 pyramids before he got to the Giza one. And on the first one, the burial chamber was underground, kind of a long ways down. And it looked like they were trying to figure out how to do this. So the first one was like a step pyramid. So that was interesting, and it didn't work. So the second one was a collapsed pyramid. It was an odd shape. That's because it had collapsed like halfway. They were trying to get the pyramid burial chamber to be in the middle of the structure somehow. So by the time they got to the one in Giza, they had figured out how to build the pyramid that we are with a shape that we're.
Oh, that's right. The first one he looked at, he thought that it was a structural error, that it must have collapsed,
yes,
and then they had figured
step one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he looked at those ones they had built before. That was his the way he did things, because when he went to the Coliseum, he didn't directly go to the Coliseum. He went to another place.
Went to another one because they had the underground, and the backstage thing was more preserved than the Coliseum, because they wanted to see how they could lift up the lions to just appear on the in the Coliseum.
Yeah, and
they figured out that they had pulleys, these shafts for like when you have a window with ropes on it to makes old heavy windows slide easily, that they had it like that. So it was weights and pulleys.
That was really interesting, how he figured out how all that stuff worked, and then went to the Coliseum. And the underground was the most fantastic stuff, how everything was happening underground. And he figured that the cages were all the way around the outside of these passages. And what great shows they must have pulled out. And that we probably could not do.
Well, they would flood the Coliseum too, and then they would have naval battles.
They did that.
Jesus.
Yeah, that was amazing. And how they had trees pop up and like sceneries and do things like plays and stuff, I guess. It was fantastic how they figured it out because of these scanners.
So that show was really cool. And I mean, and then, we didn't get to see the end of Dan Cruikshank's 80 Treasures Around the World. Maybe I'll look on YouTube and see if we can catch the end of that series. But Time Scanners was cool. I liked the last 2 episodes the best. Was the Coliseum was cool, and then it goes Jerusalem, and then to Machu Picchu in Peru.
Yeah, that was
which is where we'll end the podcast today. I've been there, and I'm so grateful for that life that I had in Amsterdam, and that the Dutch television network, after the late night talk show, let me do the travel show, and I put it up there with my favorite trips I've ever taken in my life, to Peru, and I really want to go back there one day. And it was cool how they did a ground scanner. They're on the terrace farming. I love the Incas worshipped Pachamama, which is Mother Earth, because the earth fed them. And the terrace farming, they had plants. And then I didn't know that was like an exclusive kind of, the scanners, dudes, that was it. Before they left Israel, they showed Herodium, which we heard about when we were in Israel. And that was King Herod's pleasure palace he had built on top of this this mountain, this kind of big hill in the desert. We heard about that when we were in Israel. What a and Herod was a nasty person. He had all those slaughter of the innocents, any children, any baby under 2.
Yes, he was trying to kill Jesus.
Yeah. And you think, what a rotten guy. And then he had this little
he
pleasure
killed his
palace.
son. He was a nasty person, but he was a great builder, and so they. I'm kind of surprised they didn't do Masada, but they did this other place that he had built.
Well, we went to Masada, and they don't have the structures in Masada like they had at Herodium.
Yeah, so maybe that's
so I don't think there wasn't that much to scan in Masada.
That might have been it.
Yeah, there's a great view from Masada of the Dead Sea.
Right.
But so that I didn't know about Herodium. And you're talking about that being like his little pleasure palace. And then what I didn't know about Machu Picchu was that was like for the 1,000 elites of the Inca
the rulers. Yeah.
And so there's all this food being made for them on the terraces. And that's interesting. This Hiram Bingham, the Spanish, when they took over Peru, didn't know Machu Picchu existed. And even after the Spanish colonized it, it wasn't discovered
400
for 400 years until an American from Harvard, Hiram Bingham, went and he discovered the place. And it's, we did the 2-day hike up the Andes to get to this place. Just going up the Andes, it's so gorgeous up there to think of these people living in Machu Picchu. Just in love with the earth, and you have any thoughts on that?
No, they really believed in leaving a small footprint, and everything was done to be in close to nature and be in nature. So half the Machu Picchu was houses, and the other half was these terraces where they grew their food. It was
and I've been there, and they built this water. The water still runs through these houses, and it's like what is it? I think what did they say? The 15th century, so it was the 1400s.
How they could build this stuff?
How they could build it and design it, where fresh water trickles through,
and
all the houses.
They didn't have the tools or the material to put these together. But
the Incas didn't use mortar.
Yeah.
They had, and it's when we were in Cusco, we did it. They built the Incas built these walls, and there's this famous 16-sided stone, and it's like 12 tons. This massive rock, and they built this wall, and even after earthquakes destroyed all the Spanish colonial structures, these Inca walls stayed intact. And they didn't use mortar, and their whole, I think it's the most beautiful metaphor for life, that there is no stone too irregular not to fit in place somewhere. So any kind of stone fits somewhere, and they did it without mortar. And on the Machu Picchu, they showed the Sun Temple, where the stones were beautifully carved, and there was no mortar, and the sun shines perfectly through the windows at different angles, like a clock, all throughout the year.
It's amazing how they could do that so long ago.
And then what I discovered looking through my photos was I found my massive satchel of Peru photographs. And I thought you said something nice that I've never thought.
Well, I'd never seen pictures of Machu Picchu with animals there. And you had these llamas.
Llamas. You do the Spanish.
Llamas.
You're from Argentina. You pronounce it like a Y.
Well, they were munching on the grass, and I'd never seen wildlife on any of the pictures. You're the only one that I have seen pictures of Machu Picchu a lot, but not with animals roaming around the.
Yeah, I got llamas all over the place. I got
Yeah,
so many
you
pictures
did.
of llamas and llamas at Machu Picchu.
I just wonder if when you went, they had livestock, and other times now maybe they don't have it anymore.
Well, I think it might have been like when you and I went to Yosemite, that we went there at a certain time before it got overpopulated with tourists, and that drove the animals away. Mm-hmm. Maybe when I went to Peru, when was that? 17 years ago? Maybe that was a perfect time, like when we went to Yosemite, and then since then, more tourists have been allowed in and they've been driven off.
That could be. One thing that's still a puzzle in my brain is how clear the water was when we first went there, and
it was all muddy and murky after that.
Yeah, how come the water is not clear anymore? But around that Bridal Veil Falls, it was clear. It seemed to be clear.
Yeah.
But not further down.
In the valley where the river was. But, like the Mississippi River floods every 20 years. So maybe that's maybe it was a natural cycle that the river was muddy. I don't know. But I'm so glad I looked through all these photos and I found amazing real National Geographic quality photos that I've taken at Machu Picchu, Lake Titicaca, the unbelievable sunsets, all these great llama photos. One of the greatest things I've ever done in my life was the train ride from Cusco to Puno. And you go through the Andes, and the last two cars is first class. They call it Inca class. And they're these leather armchairs. And the caboose, the last car, is a bar car. There's a bar, and there's an open banister railing on the very ass end of the train on the caboose. And you can sit there with a pisco sour or a cocktail or a beverage, and you're going through the Andes. And there's herds of llamas, and it's just the most unbelievable scenery. I think that's a trip I'd really like to do again. I really am dreaming of going back to Peru, back to Cusco, back to Machu Picchu, and definitely on that train journey again. And I think I'll post some of those pictures, hopefully in the next week or so, of that beautiful trip I had to Peru.
It was some wonderful pictures that, you could paint for sure.
And you lived in Lima, Peru, when you were a little girl.
But we never went to Machu Picchu.
And your father worked at the airport.
Well, they didn't travel much.
Yeah, but he was an airline mechanic. He worked on engines for airplanes.
For Panagra, a company that got taken over by Braniff.
And then you guys came to Washington, D.C. when you were like...
1950.
1950, and your father worked for United Airlines.
Yes.
Repairing airplane engines.
At National Airport.
National Airport. I think that's like such a cool thing about our family history. So... Okay, Mommy. Well, I think that's a lot of knowledge for one episode of a podcast. I just want to say before we end this that I've said this to you personally, but I'd like it to be recorded for posterity. There is not one single other person in the world I would rather be experiencing this lockdown with than you.
Thank you.
I couldn't be happier that you're my cellmate.
Well, it just happened because I was only coming for a week, and the next thing you know, it's been a lot longer than a week, and we've been able to
me going to Target and buying my mother fresh underwear. That was an experience.
Yeah, I couldn't believe you got the right size too. That was pretty good.
Very proud of myself for that.
And
I remember that woman. I told her the sizes that I needed, and that I needed to get some bras and some underwear.
Yeah,
and And I told the woman, she showed me some bras with lace on. I go, nothing with lace. It's for my mother. That was a funny moment.
Well, I've never bought a bra that I didn't try on, but this was unusual circumstances.
And we're getting through it.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, I hope you're safe and happy wherever you're at. Hopefully you can hug your mother or whoever you're with. And thank you so much, Mom, for being a part of this and, giving so much of yourself and your opinion and your knowledge. And thank you for making me love knowledge and art and food and all the best things in life.
Thank you for making this time a real pleasant experience.
Yeah, and I learned from this, the thing I've learned from this lockdown experience is that I'm going to make a really good wife.
You can cook well.
I've been cooking all the meals.
Yeah,
I've been doing our laundry, doing the dishes.
Yeah. I am cleaning the bathrooms and the floors. That's my section.
and that's great because those are the two things I never like to do. So
well,
I love you with all my heart, Mommy.
Thank you.
Thank you for being the best mommy in the whole world.
Well, everybody thinks that of their own. But yeah, thank you.
I love you, Mom.
Thank you.
Okay.
Love you too.
Long may you run, Sarah Rhodes. And shalom, amigos y amigas. Hooray for humanity.
Tom Rhodes, you're a funny man. Tom Rhodes, you're an international comedian. Tom Rhodes, karate kick, baby, oh yeah. Tom Rhodes, you're a groovy dude. You go all around the world, telling jokes to all of the people. You are an international comedian. You're funny to everybody in every single country in the world. Tom Rhodes, I like you very much. I think you're talented and very wonderful. Tom Rhodes, you're the best guy in the world. I wanna be your friend, you should call me sometime. Here is my phone number, 603-644-0048. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tom Rhodes, you're an international comedic sensation. Tom Rhodes, I like to listen to your podcast. Tom Rhodes, you're the best man to ever walk on the earth.